When we talk about the fear of Allah, the word fear often misleads people. Many immediately think of anxiety, trembling, or weakness. But in reality, the fear of Allah, what we call Taqwa, is the very source of strength, courage, and clarity. It is not a fear that diminishes you. It is a fear that elevates you. Imagine a person who is constantly accountable, not just to the eyes of society, not just to laws, but to the Creator of the heavens and the earth. That accountability sharpens every choice they make. Their conscience becomes a guide more powerful than any worldly authority, more compelling than any law enforced by humans. And this is the first insight. Fearing Allah is not about being afraid in a way that paralyzes you. It is about cultivating a profound awareness, a consciousness that constantly calibrates your heart, your mind, your actions. Psychologically, humans crave both structure and purpose. We need boundaries, but those boundaries are even more meaningful when they come from something greater than ourselves. When you fear Allah, you adopt a structure that is not arbitrary, it is divine. You are not fearing what is fleeting, nor are you bound by mere social expectation. You are bound by a higher consciousness. That is why fear of Allah gives people a certain aura. The person who lives with this consciousness is disciplined without oppression, guided without coercion, courageous without arrogance. They act from principle, not from impulse. And when someone acts consistently from principle, the world notices. People sense it. There is a resonance, an unspoken power that others instinctively respect. From a philosophical perspective, fear of Allah is deeply intertwined with the concept of self-mastery. Consider the mind and the heart as landscapes, wild and full of impulses, desires, and distractions. Without a guiding principle, you drift. You might find yourself drawn to comfort, to shortcuts, to pride, or to envy. But the awareness of Allah, this refined conscious fear, serves as a compass. It aligns your inner world with eternal truths, giving direction and focus. A person who fears Allah doesn't just avoid sin out of habit. They avoid it because they understand the consequences, not just in the afterlife, but in how sin erodes character, dignity, and inner peace. That understanding is strength. That understanding is authority over oneself. And authority over oneself is the foundation for authority over the world around you. Let me give you a practical illustration. Think of leaders, thinkers, or even ordinary individuals who command respect without relying on physical power or intimidation. Often what makes them respected or even feared is not their muscle, money, or status, but the unwavering moral compass that governs them. When a person is consistently honest, just, and principled, there is an invisible weight to their presence. That weight comes from the fear of Allah. They understand that they are accountable not just to the eyes of people, but to God. The world cannot manufacture that. It cannot imitate the quiet strength that comes from an internal moral structure so deep that no external pressure can shake it. And let us remember that this fear is not about gloom or anxiety. It is empowering. It teaches patience. It cultivates resilience. It instills humility, and it elevates wisdom. A person who fears Allah walks through life with clarity. Their decisions are deliberate, their words are measured. Their relationships are authentic, and in a world where chaos, ego, and desire often dictate action, such a person shines. Their fear of Allah acts like a lens, focusing scattered energies into meaningful action. So when we say, those who fear Allah are feared by the world, it begins here with this understanding of fear as strength. The world respects, admires, and even fears those who are governed by accountability to a higher authority because they cannot be easily swayed, corrupted, or undermined. Their power is subtle but undeniable, rooted in conscience and moral clarity rather than brute force. And the beauty of it is that this is accessible to every believer. It is not reserved for scholars or the wealthy. Every soul that cultivates awareness of Allah and aligns their life with His guidance can radiate this quiet authority. In the end, the fear of Allah is not a shackle, it is a sword. It does not diminish you, it empowers you. It is the invisible force that transforms ordinary humans into extraordinary individuals, capable of influencing, inspiring, and commanding respect in ways the world cannot fully understand. Remember, the strength of a believer is never in what they can take from the world, but in what the world cannot take from them, their conscience, their integrity, and their devotion to the one who watches all. And so, as you reflect on this, ask yourself, are my actions guided by the fleeting opinions of people, or by the eternal awareness of Allah? The answer to that question will determine not just how the world sees you, but the kind of power and respect you cultivate in your own soul. Fear Allah deeply, live consciously, and the world will have no choice but to notice. When we reflect on the principle that those who fear Allah are feared by the world, the next step is to understand how this fear of Allah naturally translates into worldly respect. The connection might seem counterintuitive at first. How does a spiritual consciousness, an inward orientation of the heart, create an outward aura that commands the attention or even fear of others? The answer lies in the way divine reverence shapes character, behavior, and presence. When a person lives in constant awareness of Allah, their life becomes aligned with truth, justice, and integrity. And the world, whether consciously or unconsciously, responds to that alignment. Consider how society measures power and influence. Often, people assume it comes from wealth, status, or coercion, but there is a subtler form of power that no amount of money or rank can manufacture: moral authority. This authority arises when someone's actions are consistently guided by principle rather than convenience, by conscience rather than fear of human judgment. A person who fears Allah naturally embodies this moral authority. Their speech is truthful, their dealings are just, and their decisions reflect wisdom rather than impulse. People sense this authenticity. It resonates in subtle ways, through calm confidence, unwavering fairness, and clarity of purpose. And it is precisely this resonance that commands respect, even fear, from the world. Psychologically, humans are attuned to consistency. We instinctively recognize integrity because it contrasts sharply with the unpredictability of selfishness, hypocrisy, and corruption. The person who fears Allah behaves consistently across circumstances, whether they are in private or in public, whether under pressure or in ease. That consistency is magnetic. It draws people toward admiration and caution alike. We might say, I fear angering them, or I respect their judgment. But at the root, it is the awareness that this individual is accountable to something far greater than the whims of society. Their fear of Allah gives them a scale of values that the world cannot bend, manipulate, or corrupt. From a philosophical standpoint, fearing Allah reframes the way one engages with others. It encourages fairness and equity because every action is measured not merely by social norms, but by divine standards. Such a person does not exploit weaknesses, nor do they betray trust, because the accountability is ultimate, transcending human oversight. And paradoxically, this restraint becomes a source of influence. Others see that this person cannot be swayed by bribery, intimidation, or flattery. There is a weight to their decisions, a gravity that is rooted in moral clarity. And where there is moral clarity, there is authority. Where there is authority, the world naturally bows, not out of coercion, but out of recognition. Let us reflect on the practical implications. In daily life, how often do we encounter individuals who, through their character alone, change the dynamics of a room or a community? Perhaps it is the teacher whose presence commands attentiveness, the manager whose fairness earns loyalty, or the friend whose wisdom and honesty make others pause before speaking carelessly. These are the people who, in subtle ways, are feared and respected. Their power does not come from aggression or loudness. It comes from alignment with something higher. It comes from the fear of Allah shaping every choice, every word, every gesture. And this is why fear of Allah is transformative beyond the personal sphere. When an individual embodies divine awareness, they become a stabilizing force within their environment. Communities instinctively rely on them for guidance, even if subconsciously. People recognize that these individuals are not swayed by personal gain or fleeting trends. Their actions are principled. And this is how spiritual consciousness translates into worldly respect. The fear of Allah creates an inner framework that radiates outward, shaping relationships, influence, and social dynamics. It is important to note that this respect or fear is not about intimidation. It is not about dominance or control. It is about alignment with truth and justice so consistent and visible that the world responds with reverence. When people encounter such steadfastness, they instinctively measure themselves against it. They notice the difference between transient influence and enduring authority. And in that noticing, they feel the subtle fear of confronting someone whose life is governed by divine accountability. Ultimately, the lesson here is clear. The world respects what it cannot easily manipulate, bend, or corrupt. And the individual who fears Allah embodies precisely that. Their life becomes a standard of integrity, courage, and moral clarity. People may not always articulate it, but they sense it deeply, and that sense creates influence, admiration, and sometimes even fear. So as you reflect on this principle, ask yourself, are your actions guided by fleeting trends, by the desire to please the crowd, or by a higher standard that shapes your conscience and your behavior? The respect of the world does not come from pretense. It comes from alignment with the truth that transcends opinion. Fear Allah sincerely, live with unwavering integrity, and the world will respond not because you seek its approval, but because your life embodies something it cannot deny. When we talk about the fear of Allah, it is important to understand that its effects are not just external. They reshape the internal landscape of the believer's heart and mind. One of the most profound results of living in constant awareness of Allah is the cultivation of inner peace and resilience. In a world that is increasingly chaotic, fast-paced, and filled with distractions, the individual who fears Allah develops a stability that cannot be manufactured through wealth, education, or social status. This stability is not passive, it is active, deliberate, and rooted in a consciousness that is higher than the whims of the world. Consider for a moment the human mind in its natural state. It is constantly reacting to events, to people, to fears, to desires. Many people live as if their internal state is at the mercy of external circumstances, moving from anxiety to frustration, from hope to despair, in a cycle that seems endless. But the person who fears Allah introduces a transformative variable into this equation: accountability to the Creator. Suddenly, the measure of their life is not what the world thinks, what circumstances demand, or what challenges arise. It is how their actions align with the guidance of Allah. That alignment creates a profound sense of calm. When your decisions are governed by divine consciousness, the turbulence of life loses its power to destabilize you. You are rooted in a higher reality, a reality that transcends fleeting difficulties and temporary setbacks. This inner peace is intimately connected with resilience. Life, by its very nature, presents trials. Wealth can vanish, relationships can fracture, health can fail, societies can become unstable. But the believer who fears Allah learns to endure because their foundation is not built on unstable ground. It is built on eternal awareness. When a challenge arises, they do not crumble in panic. They assess, they respond, and they persevere, guided by principles rather than impulses. This resilience is not a learned skill in the ordinary sense. It is an organic outgrowth of fear of Allah. It manifests as patience, wisdom, and the ability to maintain dignity in the face of adversity. There is a psychological elegance to this process. Fear of Allah is a fear that instills both humility and courage. Humility, because the believer recognizes that ultimate control belongs to Allah, and courage, because knowing this control allows one to act decisively without being paralyzed by fear of failure or societal judgment. In practical terms, this means that a person who fears Allah can take actions that others might shy away from, not recklessly, but with a clarity of purpose and a trust in divine justice. And when someone moves through the world with such resilience and confidence, it naturally inspires respect, sometimes even fear, from those around them. People sense that this individual cannot be easily shaken or manipulated because their strength comes from a source that transcends human threats. Philosophically, this inner resilience reflects a mastery over the self. The mind is trained to respond to life's pressures with reflection rather than reaction. The heart is fortified by remembrance of Allah, and the soul is guided by conscience rather than desire. In essence, the fear of Allah reorders priorities. The believer learns to value what is eternal over what is transient, purpose over convenience, principle over popularity. And this reordering of priorities creates a serenity that is both rare and magnetic. Others may not always understand it, but they feel it. They see someone who does not flinch under pressure, who maintains composure when chaos surrounds them, and they instinctively recognize that this person operates on a plane higher than their own plane, rooted in divine accountability. We also see in history countless examples of individuals whose fear of Allah gave them the resilience to face immense challenges. Prophets, scholars, and leaders endured trials that would have crushed ordinary humans, yet they persevered, guided by their awareness of Allah's presence. Their courage was not born from ambition or desire for worldly gain. It was born from deep-seated consciousness of accountability, from fear that inspired reflection, and from love that inspired commitment. And the effect of this resilience rippled outward. Communities were strengthened, justice was upheld, and generations were inspired. This is why inner peace and resilience are inseparable from fear of Allah. They are not side effects, they are central outcomes. Without this fear, the soul becomes vulnerable to despair, the mind becomes reactive, and the heart becomes restless. With it, a person navigates life with clarity, patience, and steadfastness. And in a world full of instability, that steadfastness is itself a form of influence. People may not always say it aloud, but they instinctively respect and even fear someone who moves through life with unwavering calm, who refuses to be destabilized by challenges, and whose decisions are guided by conscience rather than circumstance. So, as you reflect on this, ask yourself, when life tests me, do I rely on the shifting sands of circumstance, or do I anchor myself in the awareness of Allah? Do I allow challenges to define me, or do I allow divine consciousness to guide me through them? The strength of those who fear Allah is not measured by what they avoid, but by how they endure, how they remain calm, and how they act with clarity under pressure. Fear Allah sincerely, cultivate your inner peace, and the resilience you build will not only protect you, it will radiate outward, commanding respect, inspiring others, and shaping a life that is truly unshakable. One of the most profound ways the fear of Allah manifests in a believer's life is through self-control. This is not simply about restraining oneself from obvious sins or mistakes. It is about mastering the impulses, desires, and reactions that can destabilize a person's character. Self-control, when grounded in the fear of Allah, becomes a source of moral authority, an invisible strength that shapes not only the individual, but also the environment around them. People are instinctively drawn to it, and even the world, in its subtle way, recognizes it. Think for a moment about what it means to have true self-control. In everyday life, we are constantly confronted with temptations, small compromises, moments of anger, fleeting desires. Most people act on these impulses, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously. But a person who fears Allah introduces a higher filter into every decision, a measure that weighs each action not only against societal norms, but against divine accountability. This awareness changes the entire dynamic of choice. It is no longer merely about what feels good, what is convenient, or what is immediately beneficial. Every decision is measured by a higher standard, a standard that cannot be bribed, manipulated, or ignored. That is the origin of true power. It is power that comes from mastery over oneself, not domination over others. Psychologically, self-control is closely tied to freedom. It may seem paradoxical, but the more a person disciplines themselves, the freer they become. Why? Because they are no longer enslaved by fleeting desires or reactive emotions. They are guided by principle and clarity of conscience. And when someone operates from this space of freedom, their influence becomes inevitable. Others sense it. People respect the person who does not react in haste, who does not succumb to peer pressure, who does not allow anger or envy to dictate action. There is an invisible authority in that presence, an aura of strength that commands attention without a word. The fear of Allah intensifies this self-control because it is not about mere personal discipline. It is about accountability to a higher power. Every thought, every intention, every action is ultimately seen by Allah. That awareness is transformative. It prevents the believer from compromising values for temporary gain. It curbs the impulses that lead to injustice, deceit, or moral weakness. And it equips the believer with patience, clarity, and wisdom in the face of challenges that would unbalance others. This is why self-control rooted in the fear of Allah is more than a personal habit. It is a form of moral authority that others instinctively recognize and often, perhaps without consciously, admitting fear. Consider how moral authority operates in real life. Leaders, teachers, scholars, or even ordinary individuals can wield influence without force. Their decisions are guided by principle rather than convenience. They act justly, consistently, and decisively. Others may not always like them, and some may even resist them, but they cannot ignore them. There is a gravity to such people because their actions are not dictated by self-interest or popularity. Their strength is invisible yet undeniable. And this is precisely what the fear of Allah cultivates. The ability to govern oneself so thoroughly that one's presence and decisions carry weight that transcends external circumstances. Philosophically, this is a profound lesson about power and leadership. True authority is not about what you can take from others or control in the physical world. It is about what the world cannot take from you: your conscience, your integrity, your commitment to justice, and your alignment with divine guidance. When someone achieves this, they become a stabilizing force in society. People follow, defer, or respect them not because of fear in the conventional sense, but because of an intuitive recognition of moral strength. And in this way, the fear of Allah transforms ordinary individuals into figures of quiet authority whose influence extends beyond what is visible. It is also important to note that self-control and moral authority are not static. They are cultivated continuously through reflection, accountability, and fear of Allah. Each decision made in alignment with divine guidance reinforces the habit. Each act of patience, honesty, or fairness strengthens the believer's moral authority. Over time, this creates a life where integrity and influence are inseparable. People do not simply respect or fear you for what you have, they respect you for what you embody. And what you embody in this case is the fear of Allah made manifest in self-control and principled action. So as you consider your own life, reflect on this. How often do you let impulses guide you? And how often do you let conscience shaped by divine awareness guide you? True strength is not measured by how easily you achieve your desires, but by how faithfully you resist what is wrong. Fear Allah deeply, cultivate self-control, and embrace the moral authority that comes from acting consistently from principle. In doing so, you will not only command respect in the world around you, but also fortify yourself against the chaos, temptations, and pressures that inevitably arise. The power that comes from self-mastery is subtle yet formidable. It is the kind of power that cannot be bought, threatened, or undermined. It is a strength rooted in divine consciousness, expressed through deliberate action, and recognized by the world not because it is loud, but because it is unwavering. Fear Allah, govern yourself, and the moral authority you cultivate will become a force that shapes your life, your community, and your legacy. One of the most profound dimensions of fearing Allah is that it acts as a safeguard not just for the individual, but for the broader community. This fear is not a mere abstract concept or a psychological quirk. It functions as a moral compass, a shield that protects a person from succumbing to evil, injustice, and corruption. In essence, when a person fears Allah, they create an inner boundary that the world cannot break, a threshold that separates the righteous from the reckless, the principled from the opportunistic. And the power of this protective fear is something the world instinctively senses, often responding with a mixture of respect, admiration, and, in some cases, caution. To understand this, we must first recognize that human nature is fragile and prone to temptation. Without a guiding principle, people are vulnerable to greed, pride, anger, and selfish desire. Left unchecked, these impulses manifest as wrongdoing, not always violent, but equally destructive. They harm relationships, communities, and societies. But the believer who fears Allah is governed by a higher accountability. Their conscience is calibrated not just to societal norms, but to divine standards. Every action is measured against the awareness that Allah sees, knows, and judges. This is not fear that paralyzes, it is fear that constrains, guides, and elevates. It protects the believer from paths that lead to harm, injustice, or moral compromise. Psychologically, this protective effect is profound. Humans often rationalize wrongdoing with excuses. No one will notice. It's just this once, or everyone else is doing it. These justifications exploit our weaknesses and erode character. But the awareness of Allah's observation interrupts this rationalization. The believer cannot easily deceive themselves because they recognize that accountability is unavoidable, even if hidden from human eyes. This constant mindfulness creates a form of moral resilience, a self-regulating mechanism that prevents the believer from stepping over ethical boundaries. And over time, this becomes a habit, an ingrained pattern of righteousness, which in turn commands respect from others who see it consistently embodied in one's actions. Philosophically, fear of Allah transforms weakness into strength. By restraining impulses and avoiding wrongdoing, the believer gains a moral clarity that others lack. In a world often dominated by manipulation, deceit, and opportunism, this clarity is powerful. People instinctively sense when they encounter someone who acts with integrity, justice, and accountability. They notice that such a person is not swayed by corruption, flattery, or intimidation. There is a weight to their presence, a force that exists not in the physical realm, but in the ethical and spiritual. And it is precisely this force that leads the world to respond with a mix of respect and fear, because the individual is aligned with principles that cannot be easily challenged. Historically, we can see this protective dimension of fear of Allah in countless examples. Prophets and righteous leaders confronted immense corruption, injustice, and evil in their societies, yet they were shielded by their unwavering consciousness of Allah. Their fear of Him prevented them from compromising their values, and in doing so, they became bulwarks against the moral decay around them. Ordinary believers, too, when they cultivate fear of Allah, serve as stabilizing forces in their families, communities, and workplaces. Their actions, guided by accountability, act as a deterrent to wrongdoing. People instinctively think twice before attempting injustice because they know the individual is governed by a higher law, a law that cannot be bent by threats, bribery, or intimidation. This protective effect is also deeply practical. It means that fear of Allah equips a person to make decisions that uphold justice, resist oppression, and confront corruption, even when it is inconvenient or risky. The fear of Allah provides a moral framework that is not dependent on popularity, majority opinion, or societal approval. It allows the believer to act rightly, even when others choose to act wrongly, creating an aura of steadfastness that the world cannot ignore. And in that steadfastness, people sense the presence of someone who is principled, disciplined, and morally unshakable. A presence that naturally commands both admiration and respect, and in some cases fear. So what does this mean for us personally? It means that cultivating fear of Allah is not simply about performing rituals or avoiding sin. It is about creating an ethical and spiritual armor that protects both our soul and the broader world. Every moment of mindfulness, every act of restraint, every decision guided by divine accountability strengthens this armor. The believer becomes a living example of integrity, a force that preserves justice, a guardian against the erosion of morality. And the world in turn senses this strength, often responding with deference or hesitation, because it recognizes a power that is invisible yet undeniable. In the final analysis, fear of Allah is more than obedience, it is protection. It shields the believer from moral collapse, guides them away from destructive paths, and empowers them to stand firmly against evil. This protection is not coercive. It is natural, flowing from the alignment of the heart, mind, and actions with divine principles. And for those who live with such fear, the world cannot help but acknowledge it. So reflect on this deeply. Are your decisions, your actions, and your conscience guided by fleeting desires and convenience, or are they anchored in the awareness of Allah? Fear Allah sincerely, let that fear guide and protect you, and you will find that it not only safeguards your soul, but also creates a presence in the world that is respected, acknowledged, and in its own way feared. When we consider the lives of those who truly fear Allah, one of the most remarkable aspects is not just the power they wield in their own time, but the legacy they leave behind. The influence that extends far beyond themselves. Fear of Allah is not merely a personal discipline or a private state of consciousness. It is a transformative force that shapes the world around the believer, leaving an imprint that resonates across families, communities, and even generations. The individual who cultivates this fear lives consciously, acts deliberately, and inspires naturally, creating ripples of moral influence that the world cannot ignore. Think about influence in ordinary terms. Many people seek it through material success, social status, or persuasive abilities. But these forms of influence are fragile. They fade with time, depend on circumstances, and can be corrupted or destroyed. The influence born from fear of Allah is fundamentally different. It is built on principles that are eternal, anchored in divine accountability. The actions of such individuals are not contingent on recognition or reward from others. They are guided by a commitment to truth, justice, and ethical integrity. And because these actions are rooted in conscience rather than expediency, their impact is enduring. Psychologically, people are drawn to consistency, authenticity, and moral clarity. When a person's life reflects these qualities, it leaves a mark on those who encounter them. A single act of honesty, courage, or compassion inspired by the fear of Allah can influence countless decisions, shape community norms, and instill values that persist long after the individual is gone. In this way, fear of Allah creates a form of authority that transcends time. It is the power of example, the kind of influence that cannot be legislated or commanded, but that people adopt willingly because they recognize its truth and wisdom. Consider the way this works in practice. Parents who fear Allah model integrity, patience, and accountability for their children. Leaders who fear Allah set standards of justice and fairness that shape organizations and communities. Scholars and teachers who fear Allah transmit knowledge with sincerity and moral purpose, guiding generations to think, act, and live rightly. The ripples of these actions spread far beyond the immediate circle, creating a network of influence that continues to grow, often quietly, often without fanfare, yet profoundly impactful. In essence, the fear of Allah allows an individual to extend their presence and impact beyond the limitations of their own lifespan. Philosophically, this is a profound insight into human purpose. The fear of Allah teaches that our lives are not merely about immediate gratification, personal gain, or social recognition. They are about accountability, responsibility, and the stewardship of influence. Each choice, each action, and each moment of reflection contributes to a legacy that can shape the moral and spiritual landscape of society. Those who fear Allah recognize that true success is measured not by what they acquire, but by what they inspire in others, the character they build, the justice they uphold, and the ethical standards they model. This is a far-reaching form of power, one that endures because it is rooted in divine alignment rather than temporal favor. Historically, we see this clearly in the lives of prophets, saints, and scholars who lived with deep consciousness of Allah. Their influence extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. Even centuries later, their teachings, their example, and their moral courage continue to guide people, shape societies, and inspire awe. This is the ultimate testament to the enduring power of fear of Allah. It creates influence that is resistant to the erosion of time, opinion, or circumstance. It is a power that shapes minds, hearts, and souls long after the individual who cultivated it has left this world. And this is not reserved for extraordinary individuals alone. Every believer who fears Allah, even in seemingly small and ordinary ways, contributes to this ripple of influence. Every act of honesty, patience, justice, and humility has the potential to affect others in ways that are unseen but significant. This is why fear of Allah is so transformative. It turns ordinary human actions into vessels of lasting moral and spiritual impact. It allows a person to live with a consciousness that their life matters not just for themselves, but for the wider tapestry of human experience. So as we reflect on this, consider the question, what legacy are you building with your life? Are your actions guided by fleeting desires, by convenience, or by a higher accountability to Allah? Fear of Allah does not only protect you, shape your character, and command respect in your immediate environment, it positions you to leave a mark that endures. It allows your life to inspire courage, integrity, and faithfulness long after you are gone. And that is the true measure of influence, the kind that survives time, adversity, and the shifting tides of the world. Ultimately, fearing Allah transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. It ensures that your presence is not only felt in the moment, but remembered, respected, and carried forward by those whose lives you touch. Live consciously, act with integrity, and cultivate the fear of Allah sincerely. In doing so, you will not only navigate your own life with strength and clarity, but also leave a legacy of moral authority, influence, and inspiration that the world cannot erase.